my name is Katie Weatherup and I'm a shamanic practitioner, and I want to share some information from a recent journey I did around money and manifestation and working with the guides in these areas. And it's just a gift of something to start to think about and something to start to call in, because what we ask for is really important, and I'm really passionate about using this traditional modality of shamanism to really help us to thrive in modern times. And so I recently started this group experience where I'm doing work to help people to just really have right alignment with money, to really have whatever is the enough for them to really be supported at the circumstance level of life, with a lot of ease around that. That's my vision for the group. And one of the things that's really interesting in taking that request to the guides is the modern person has potentially some really different needs, some needs that look differently about it than the indigenous person back in the day. And so one of the really, to my mind, cool things that we've come up with is an ability in the modern era not to spend all our time meeting our survival needs, and the ability to create a situation with a high potential of continuity for our fundamental survival needs to be met now and in the future. And so, we could argue about the illusion of the world and how things could change, but let's just go with sort of the, practicality that there are a number of people who have the privilege of living in first world countries who are able to save up money for retirement, for example. And there's something that's really beautiful about that. And now that we have the ability to store food and the ability to transport food, we're not just bound by how we did with winter supplies this year or the last couple of years from the farm. We have this capacity to team up as humans and create a lot of really cool things. And one of the things that our ancestors didn't have in the way that's available to modern people is how much the modern lifespan has gone up. And when we look at lifespan 500 years ago, for sure the fact that so many women died in childbirth, which they don't in the same numbers, definitely affects the statistics on that. But even if you take out the people dying in childbirth and the high child mortality rates, again, super big gift of the modern era. We are having a lot of success in children making it into adulthood. We have this much greater lifespan than our ancestors. So even though there's a whole bunch about the modern era that isn't super supportive, processed sugar and being under blue light disrupting our sleep cycles, there are all these things that are maybe not as optimal, but the upshot, if we really eagle-eye it, is overall humans are having this opportunity to live longer. And this window of time that we have where we really get to delve into our elder years potentially can be really rich. And it isn't for everyone. For sure there are people who, are just really locked into their patterns and stay really connected to those patterns, who stop innovating, who stop inviting in new things, who become really isolated. We can look around and see something that looks like a really scary version of these later years. But there are also, with the joy of the internet, some really radiant people who are talking about the depth and the amazingness and how their 80s are like the best decade of their life that they've ever experienced so far. And closer to home, my mother, who's in her 70s, will tell you absolutely she wouldn't trade it for anything. She's happier than she's ever been in her life, and she's vital and able-bodied and engaged, and it's just a really cool thing to witness, especially if we're on a personal growth path. So my biggest investment in my future and life in general, my now and my future, has a lot to do with being really present to being in right relationship with myself. But there's also this cool thing that we have the option of with this longer lifespan of sort of completing our relationship with working hard for money in our younger years and having this structure of money ideally that will support us in our later years. So if we look at human systems, this idea of social security and retirement plans, it's a pretty darn modern concept. This wasn't something that people organized themselves around in days of yore in the same way. And so as a result, we do really well if we specifically call in teams of guides around money that are really good at understanding compound interest in the stock market and investments and all this complicated stuff. And as an engineer, I can be, really geeky about some things that aren't all that interesting to some number of people in metaphysics. I personally really like Venn diagrams, which are the two circles that overlap that show how much of this group and this group belong to both groups. So if you look at the people who think spirit guides are a cool thing to invite into your life, who are actively telling the universe what to bring them, and you look at the people who are super geeky about stocks and bonds and how this whole complicated economic modern system works, for sure there's overlap, but it's not a huge overlap. So what's interesting about this, and I think what's important for us as we go forward, is understanding that there's this invitation that we might want to give to guides that are not part of our natural affinity. So we have this affinity for guides of things that we're interested in. So you might be more inclined to call in a belly dance guide or an artistic guide, and those are cool. Like, by all means, invite those guides in. But I'm going to suggest that inviting guides that understand modern finance and can help you be in right relationship and help you have the benefits, because what we know about this super complicated way that humans are organizing money is it's not going equally well for everyone. There are people who are having a really rich experience that's unlocking some really cool doors, and there are people who are having a lot of struggle with it. And social justice is a different conversation, and manifestation and all that. What I want to invite in is looking at it from the perspective of if you can be aligned with what's healthy and good about the system and invite it to work on your behalf. Because the fact that we could look at the Social Security system and we could go, wow, there's a lot of mess with this. And we could also look at the fact that for all that there's a lot of mess with it, there's checks that are being sent, and elderly people who are not good candidates for being in the job market now, who are still able to be okay because of the system to whatever degree. So again, it's easy. I think there's a lot of pull in terms of our opinions about how the system works and our affinity for it or our lack of affinity. And I'm inviting you to just pull in the sort of Byron Katie, this is reality. We have this system. There are great things about it. There are challenging things about it. It's ever evolving. It's changing really fast. And by inviting right relationship with it, we can ask our guides for something that our ancestors would not have asked for. So when we ask for financial well-being, that doesn't just look like I have a roof over my head right now, there's food in the refrigerator. We have this gift in the modern era where a lot of people are successfully creating continuity of needs met, not just the needs of the moment, but also the opportunity to have needs met going forward. And personally, I really do want to have a retirement account. I want to do this weird, wacky, shamanic thing that I absolutely love. And I want the ultimate outcome. I don't ever see not wanting to do it. Who knows what the future holds? That's a story about the future, of course. But I love the work. It's not tied to needing the money. But it would be nice to have a place in my life where I didn't have to keep my eye on the ball so much around money, where I didn't have to watch whether my income stream was matching, the amount that I was going to need to pay for rent and taxes and insurance and all of these different things. There's a freedom in that. And so one of my suggestions and invitations is, if you're somebody who really resonates with this, being aware that when you call on the guides for financial abundance and for money flow and for being taken care of in your safety, security needs and at the level of circumstance, if you're working with certain guides that have worked with humanity for a really long time, they have a lot of power and beauty to offer us, but there may be something lost in translation because that would mean your crops grow well, or it would mean that the animals that you need to hunt are available to you. And those kinds of abundance are relevant for certain people, but there are a lot of people where when we talk about what would really work at the level of circumstance related to money, there's a different structure, there's a new structure, and there's a new energy, and there's a new system. And rather than arguing with the system, if you're an activist, an economic activist, yay you, totally whatever speaks to you. But if that's not where you want to express your gifts and your time and your attention, inviting right relationship with that system. And that can look a lot of different ways. I mean, you may want to specifically invest in stocks and bonds that are having ethical, sustainable environmental practices. So there's a lot of space within this complicated system to honor what works for you from an ethics perspective and what works for the money system. And for sure, there are people where there's just no overlap. They're like, absolutely, I completely disagree with everything about economics, as it's being done in mainstream society. I won't have anything to do with it. And that's totally fine. What I'm offering in this is probably not very relevant for them because they're wanting to be not in relationship to that system, and I just don't have wisdom for them in that regard because I'm somebody who's has a credit score and drives a car and has a house that I pay rent on, and all of those kind of things. I'm interfaced with the system while doing this different approach to earning my living. So anyway, as that geeky engineer, I really like systems and I really like understanding how they all work. So it's just an additional distinction that when you ask for the money part of your life to be organized in a way that's super supportive, you may want to clarify that that doesn't look like, having your herd of horses thrive, unless you happen to have horses. It looks like having the lines of money that happen in the modern times flow really well. And that's something that I work with on behalf of myself, on behalf of my clients. And by no means am I the only person qualified to do this. So I imagine that a lot of people have their own practices, and I'm just wanting to offer a distinction of calling in stock market guides and guides that that work with this complicated system in a positive way so that they can help facilitate someone who maybe doesn't have a natural affinity. So one of the things I think that's hard sometimes about people who are very connected to love and heart connection and intuition and the natural world and this sort of energetic sensitivity is they just don't have a lot of interest and affinity for economic systems. It just doesn't appeal to them. And that's where, given that we benefit from the gifts that can provide, seeing the bigger picture of where that can create a foundation where if you came to a place in your life where that was handled, and I'm not talking about the extravagance. It seems like whenever people talk about manifesting money, they start, looking at lottery win levels, and I don't aspire to that. I mean, it would be fun for a minute if it showed up, but what I really aspire to is this right livelihood where at the level of circumstance I have the freedom to choose what really works for me in the world. And there's a lot less money than a big lottery win would provide that would totally provide that in a way that absolutely rocked for me and give me a lot of freedom. So if you're someone who's drawn to being artistic and having unstructured time and talking to the trees, the foundation of a really good economic thing that's handled for you well can provide a lot of freedom, especially if things are moving along the lines of setting that up in the future. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you found value I want to really thank my patrons. I have a Patreon offer, and the people who are providing that give me bandwidth to do things like this that are not tied to a specific offering, but more the content and something that I want to share with the world. So I really, really appreciate all of your support, and thank you so much for listening. Again, my name is Katie Weatherup, and you can learn more about me and my work at my website, which is handsoverheart.com.